Hello and welcome to Reiki Women Podcasts. It's Bronwen Logan here, and I have my two lovely colleagues. We have Carrie, Varela and Michaela Daystar here, the whole group. Hi, guys. And today we're going to talk about emotional resilience and how we can achieve that with the system of Reiki. So what do we mean by emotional resilience? I guess is probably a good place to start. And go for it, guys.
Yeah, well, I've been sitting with this one a lot as I've been kind of thinking through my practice and how to communicate it out to other folks, right? Like what what are the outcomes that one can experience? And because there's such a strong emphasis on healing as the outcome of the system of Reiki, that's such a broad description that can touch so many different ways, and that is, a little bit kind of tangential to the outcomes of the system as it was originally designed. So if we look at, the outcomes of the system of Reiki being living as an embodiment of the precepts, we see inside of that a lot of what we might call emotional resilience, being unattached to our fear and our anger, in other words, being able to be present with those emotions without letting them overtake us or overwhelm us, knock us off center, freeze us up, set our nervous system into our fight or flight, mode responses. When we see being grateful, being compassionate, these are emotional and mental states of resilience. And so just the term resilience, started really resonating with me as a way to describe what it is we actually experience over time as we're working with the system of Reiki. And, it's one that really is heartening to me personally, especially coming out of or coming through these times of the pandemic when there was so much emotional and mental turmoil that came up for so many of us, so much instability, so many things got interrupted, disrupted, and I witnessed a considerable amount of emotional instability, which was completely understandable and widespread. And at the same time, I was really aware that I felt, I felt a number of emotions, but overall, I felt stable, and I felt peaceful, and I felt, like that metaphor of the stable mountain, that there was this storm that was kind of raging and tumbling things up and changing, so many aspects of our life. And inside of that, I was still able to, most times, most days, not all the time, but most times keep a clear head, make good decisions, stay in a place where I felt stable. And it really felt like resilience. And so I've been really leaning into that point of entry to think about and talk about the outcomes of the system of Reiki as something that really permeates our life in quite a few significant ways when we practice. So thought that would be a juicy place for us to jump into conversation. What about you, Carrie? What comes up for you?
Well, I love that metaphor that you just spoke to, and it really came to me super strongly in a yoga class I taught recently that the title of the class is Deep Healing In. And so we really are working on emotional resilience more than I think people would really realize that, but some of it is just this hour of peacefulness and mindfulness to help us find that emotional resilience. But anyways, the theme that came to me in the class, and I've mentioned this a little bit before, it was a long time ago, but there's where I live on the beach, there's this rock called Grandma's Rock, and it's named so by the indigenous peoples of where I live, the native ancestors of this land. And I had this feeling of being that rock and being that grandmother that just is like out there. She's, in the ocean, and she's experiencing all the waves, but she knows she's not the ocean. She knows she's the rock, and just grounded and centered in her being, and that the waves are coming and they're a part of her landscape of what she sees, what she experienced, what she knows to be true, but she's not the waves. And that's what I am reminded of as you speak to those concepts around emotional resilience, is like coming back to our sacred center, and forgiving and being kind to ourselves when we forget it, when we forget that we're not the waves. And those waves are the emotions that we live in our daily life. And some of those waves are beautiful, right? They take us to this, like these highs of joyfulness, of compassion, of like an emotional swoon. That is something that I think of. It's like just being like, oh wow, like so incredibly grateful or happy, or but then also there's like the dark side of that, being really maybe drawn into our anger and worry, and to the point where it obscures everything else, you can't see. So coming back into a place where we can remind ourselves that we're not this movement, that we're this sacred person witnessing all of these emotions in our life. And so, the work of Reiki, and just sitting for an hour with a Reiki practitioner, either or for yourself, or in a meditation, I think gives us that mindfulness. Because if we're in the waves, there's no grounding, there's no centering, there's no ability to recognize, like, oh, that I can let that move through me, or I can let go of that. But we just can be, caught up in all of this emotional turmoil. And so we really need time to separate ourselves from that turmoil and not be in it. I'd say so that's my personal point of view about emotional resilience. But the confusing thing is that sometimes life puts us into uncomfortable positions where we have to be in those emotions. We have to honor them. We have to move from those places too, that we can't just completely like cut them off as like, oh, that's not part of me. But sometimes, when we're, in a place of indecisiveness, for example, you can feel those like, this one, which choices to be made in life. Sometimes you just have to take a leap and not know what the outcome's going to look like, but just trust the process. And so that can bring up a lot of emotions too. And that emotional intelligence to be able to inquire within and notice where you are in that process.
Yeah. Well, I guess I love both of the analogies there of what resilience is, and for me it's that thing that being able to bounce back and to be able to not be overly affected. I mean, that's what you've both said. Yeah. So that and yeah, I like that idea of being that grandmother rock, because the thing about rocks, we think that they're really totally inflexible and that they never move, but they do. Like there is a wearing away, there is still change is still occurring, but it is just very stable, as you were saying. So if I look at the system of Reiki, then I would say that resilience, how do we find that resilience within the system of Reiki? And if I think about resilience, to me it feels like we're talking about the mind more than anything. Yeah. So we're talking about our mindset. So how we see things, how we think, and if we want to look at the system of Reiki, we can see how that actually supports us with that. So I would say something like, obviously, the Reiki precepts, which is our mental focus. And we can also say that the precepts are what all the practices are there for, to support. So we can see how important the mind is. The mind is making everything here work, but it's also doing all these other things as well, these external things. So it's incredibly busy. And it's, we talk about monkey mind, for example. That's why we do our meditation practices, to help us bring our thoughts in, to help us to focus. And one of the main aspects of the system of Reiki, the practices within it, are to teach us how to focus. So we can see that the mind is incredibly important if we're looking at emotional resilience. All we need to do is take the precepts, and we need to bring those precepts into our lives, into our everyday lives. Yeah. But saying that, I do think that we can't just say that the mind is like, I cut that off here and that's that. There's also the rest of this going on at the same time. So, and it is working with that. And I personally find that if I get physical problems, specific physical problems, recurring physical problems, I can actually relate them to my mindset. What is going on in my mind? Am I more fearful, more worried, more, whatever it might be, that whatever the physicality of me can tell me that I'm actually not being resilient. Yeah. So it's that understanding of ourselves, and working with the system of Reiki, we do that is it. We are learning about ourselves all the time. I mean, we can say do not anger, for example, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to anger. I mean, we have to work with that. It's an ongoing process. And the more that it becomes a part of me, the understanding about anger and what anger is and how it affects me, if it's anger or worry or whatever, how that might affect me, understanding that within myself is going to give me a lot more focus and control of my life. And the monkey mind is going to, take a back seat, and I'm going to be able to focus. That means I'm going to have less physical issues. I'm going to have less mental issues, and I'm going to be a lot more balanced, which comes back to what you said at the beginning, Michaela, which is, what is healing? And, for me, healing is to be whole. Yeah. So we're in that sense of wholeness. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And, I love that emphasis of the mind, as I've talked about on this channel before, one of the things that I focus a lot of time on and teaching on is working with being trauma informed in our Reiki practice, working with Reiki practitioners on that. And so in, learning about the physiology of trauma, learning about the ways in which, when we have, an excessive amount of fear or trauma stuck in our body, it hasn't moved through us. One of the things that happens is this disconnection between the, conscious, thinking, visioning, planning mind and the reactionary mind or the emotional mind. And there's this fracturing that happens where we can't control the responses, and we get stuck in whatever our own habitual response is. For me, it's often to freeze up. So when I'm, in my past, I've had, long stretches of time where I didn't know how to control that process for myself. There was trauma that was there and it wasn't metabolized through my body. And so if something, startling or frightening was happening, I would, it's like my mind would just go. I would freeze up. I wouldn't be able to make decisions. And I didn't have access to my emotions. And so, for me, when I think of emotional resilience, for me, emotional unresilience is that experience, right? For other people, it'll be other manifestations. And, one of the things that's been so powerful for me studying and practicing Reiki from the perspective of its Japanese origins is this concept of the heart mind, that the heart and the mind, bridging that line, here, so that we don't stay above the neck, that the heart and the mind are actually, when we're integrated, when we're whole, when we're in our wholeness, is integrated, and then they are integrated with the body, and all of that is integrated with the breath and the energy and the voice, our ability to communicate, to breathe, to expand ourselves. And so for me, that's like a map to emotional resilience, right? It's navigating this plane between the heart and the mind, which can get severed, right? It can be like an avalanche comes and just blocks off access between the two, right? So our emotional life and our mental life, our ability to feel and our ability to think gets disconnected from each other. And so practicing, even the foundational practice of Joshin Kokyoho, which, brings our attention through that gulf, through that wasteland that might be existing here, through the heart down into the body, has been such a powerful practice to metabolize whatever that trauma is inside of me that causes me to freeze up. And, it certainly still can happen, but, when I think back on it, like that used to be a regular experience. If something, required my quick decision making and it had a fear element to it, if it was startling me or if it felt threatening in any way, it's like I just would not be able to access my decision making, and I wouldn't be able to feel what I was feeling. And so this map, this template that we have through Sanmitsu, through the mysteries of our body, mind, and voice, through the concept of heart mind and the bringing together of these two aspects of ourself, and then to put that into practice through these simple and accessible practices has just completely changed my experience of my own mental, emotional, physical life and experience. And then I see that happening with the folks that I get to be in community with. And I think maybe that possibly above everything else is what makes me so devoted to this practice, because like that is a lived experience from something that felt totally uncontrollable. Like I have no control over the fact that my mind checks out when it's most needed, right, to make a good decision in a serious situation, and to the opposite of that, which is what I now experience. That was life changing, and it just makes me so devoted to this practice.
Yeah, that checking out thing is like when we go back into the primal brain, and
Mm-hmm.
it's that fight or flight or whatever. But it's something that can be it's totally outside of our realm. I see it on my dog. I have a little rescue dog, and she's fine when she's inside. When we go outside in the nature, she just goes straight back into primal brain, and she can't help herself, and she just goes crazy, right? And then you
Mm.
bring her back inside, and she's like just normal, everything's fine. And it's sparked by a fear or whatever, but it just immediately takes it back into that. What I was going to say is that hands-on healing to me, as well as an aspect of the system of Reiki, is a beautiful way of combining that, the mind-body experience.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we talk a lot, well, I talk a lot about, meditation or whatever, but, just that idea of touch and as a way for us on ourselves and also with others, how incredibly important that is and how that can support us. So it's the physical aspect there supporting the mental aspect. Sort of the opposite of what I was saying before, where I was saying, the mental stuff is causing physical things. But on the other hand, we have that, obviously it reciprocates. And that's why hands-on healing is so important, that, touching and holding each other, being with one another in that way is so healing and very calming for the mind. And yeah, I think that really supports us with our resilience as well.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And I think, sometimes when you think about emotional resilience, it also is like, I don't know, this idea of like being flatlined or like, rolled over by a certain life circumstance with something happening in your life. And that's what sometimes I think actually we need in order to cultivate the emotional resilience, is like we have to like get vertical. We have to lay down. We have to connect to our heart and mind. We have to breathe, and we have to tap into a consciousness that's not necessarily just our mind and our thoughts. It's this soulful
Yeah.
awareness, and that is the feeling of just like surrounding whatever the issue is. I think of surrounding it in Reiki, or surrounding it in light, or surrounding it in consciousness. And in that process, and getting still and not being caught up in all of the thoughts moving through my brain about a certain thing or circumstance, and getting quiet so that I can really feel the wisdom inside me. And I think that's what like gets me back up, gets me back off of the, and so when I can tap into that, and when I can really feel that, it also requires me to be aware of how life makes me feel. and how these circumstances are truly affecting me. So, we can't really cultivate resilience by just brushing it off like it doesn't happen, like it didn't matter, or it, didn't hurt, or we're not angry, but to be with that deeper wound of whatever it is that's been triggered, that's stirring up inside of us. And then when we can be in that deeper place, I think a soulful wisdom arises for us. And I love what you were talking about, Michaela, about that restoring the heart and mind. And I think of that as the Reiki gift, really Reiki restores our pure heart and mind. And I see it again and again, not only just for myself, like if I've had a treatment and, I might go in just kind of bogged down with all this stuff, all of the things that I juggle as a mom, as a business owner, as, sole proprietor of other people's problems. Sometimes I feel that way. Um, but so, and then I can, if I get a treatment myself, I feel like I can, well, just, process through whatever's just kind of right there on the surface for me. And then I look brighter. I am brighter. I feel this sense of inner clarity that just shines through. And I see that again and again with my clients too. They come in, look a little like you can feel in their body language, rolled shoulders, arched back, a sadness in their eyes, or just there's so many little things that we kind of pick up off of our clients, and give us a sense of how they're really doing, above and beyond the words that they speak. And and then at the end of the session, what's like so rewarding, it's just to see their little sparkle back and they're like smiling again. They're like, wow, I feel so much better. And that's the Reiki medicine, is just, connecting us back, I think, to this deeper place, our soul.
Yeah.
There's this, I'm struggling with the word, but maybe a teaching from Buddhism is that, the right hand and the left hand are like wisdom and action. And that we have to and that wisdom washes the hands of action, and action washes the hands of wisdom. So if we spend all of our time cultivating wisdom, meaning like being out of our life, in our head or in this kind of emotional, spiritual space, and we can't bridge it out to action, into some change that needs to be spurred into our life, then we're just going to get stuck there. Yeah. I've gotten stuck there as a practitioner in Reiki. Sometimes this is an addiction almost, to being like, well, I got to get it right. And I got to stay way back in this more like mindful place. But I think the real work of Reiki is to bridge it into action, to bring it into your life and into your words, into your day-to-day, beyond the time that you have to give yourself hands-on healing or meditation or connect with the precepts. It's like how in those, even the moments where we're triggered or in the spur of the moment of a feeling or making a decision, how can we just trust that process? And so, but likewise, we can't do all action. So if you're just a person that always wants to take action, to move, to change, we can be actually really unstable with that as well, because we're not taking time to step out and be in our inner wisdom. So I think those things are a practice that I bring into my life that help me develop resilience.
Yeah, that's a theme that actually came up in the class I was teaching yesterday. I did taught the first class of my 8-week Okuden Reiki 2 class, and that theme of kind of navigating the internal to the external. And I love kind of putting it in the terms of wisdom and action, and the way that they're in relation, that they need to be in relationship with each other for us to really be experiencing our wholeness and to be bringing that wholeness into the world. The way we were talking about it was the imbalance of either, only being internal with our practice, really only wanting to be alone with our practice, going inside, and that's really where our comfort zone is. But being in practice among other people, in community, in the midst of life, in the midst of conflict, that feels like a separate place. Conversely, if we're only wanting to be in practice when we are in community, when we're supported by other people, when we feel like we're being, reflected back by other people, and we're afraid to go into that inner place. We avoid that. We're not comfortable being with ourselves or by ourselves. Either one of those extremes is out of balance. And so, and is a form of lack of resilience, right? If I can't be with myself, then I'm not in full resilience. And if I can't be with others, I'm not in full resilience. And so, this practice, even if we look at the first symbol, right, the symbol that spirals in and then at the same time is spiraling back out, I often kind of meditate with that symbol in that way. Is I need to bring, my attention in. I need to work on integrating those aspects of myself, the heart, mind, the body, the voice. And then I need to express that with and around other people, and to bring that out into the world. And, we could extend that out to bring that out into the world in a way that makes the world a better place. One of the tenets of my practice is social action. Reiki for self-development, emotional resilience, and social action. And so, that experience of bringing it out into the world, but continuing to spiral back in and spiral back out, is such an important map that the system of Reiki gives us for cultivating our resilience. And yeah, I love that way that you put it, of wisdom and action being the hands that wash each other, that move together. That's really beautiful.
Yeah, it's about balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah. I was just thinking about my dog again. But I was just thinking that, we all find different ways to because we're all different and unique, and we've all got different experiences, and that we find different ways of finding that balance and resilience. And we know that within the system of Reiki, there are different ways of doing that, different ways of working and practicing, which I think is really helpful. And it did make me think of my dog, because I sort of have found like a way to help her as well. With when she's outside, I actually put a collar on her. I put a lead on her. Yeah. And it's a long lead. And I don't hold it. I just leave her with that. And so she feels this sense of connection, to I think a place of stability. Yeah. And so when she's out in the wild, just outside, that she doesn't have as much fear as she would normally have, because she's so much calmer. She doesn't run like crazy. She's just like, it's okay. And she listens to me. So it's really quite amazing. And it's a bit like, I often talk about, like, there's like the helium balloon, which is the mind. And then we have like the string, which connects us to the hara. And that it's like our grounding. And it's stopping the mind from going like this. And it's the mind-body connection. So, it's almost like that is a physical representation of that, in a way.
Yeah. No, I love that. Well, and yeah, and that, that's kind of back to that stable base, right? That rock, that foundation of the mountain, right? It's like that lead and that little sweater is like the stable base, the rock for your pup, that, okay, there is a foundation here of safety and security. I'm well held.
Yeah.
And so I can be more brave, and I can be more calm in my risk taking and my bravery.
I
I
can
can be,
clearly. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Beautiful.
yeah, exactly. I just as you were talking, I got this image. The mountain has been a powerful metaphor for me lately, and as I was telling you before we jumped on this podcast, that I got to spend the weekend in Oregon and in a very mountainous place. And I'm from a mountainous place, but I've for the last 12 years lived in a very flat place. And so my Flatlander's heart was just like so nourished by being in this mountainous place, and just kind of, watching the lines of the watershed moving down the mountain, the kind of grooves that get carved in a mountain over time. As you said, they do change, with the environment. And I imagined, the precepts kind of as that base of the mountain. As you said, all of the other elements of the system are really guiding us to an embodiment of those precepts. And all of those grooves of the watershed moving down the mountain being the other elements that are all leading us to that stable foundation, that resilient and strong, stable base of the precepts of living as an embodiment of them, as really a fully functioning ecosystem. And working with whatever weather is coming through. Maybe it's a snow-capped mountain at a certain part of the year. Maybe there's torrential floods running down the mountain. But all of it ends up in this really rich watershed at the base of the mountain. So it's just really having fun with that imagery in my mind as you were talking.
I think that's a beautiful idea. Maybe we should finish with that.
Well,
Carrie,
I think that's for me one thing. If I could add one more
okay.
thing, is that is also really powerful thing to do when you need a little emotional resilience, is to get outside. And I had this experience just this week. I was having a little bit of an emotional turmoil moment, and I realized I hadn't been outside. I hadn't taken some fresh air in a while, and and it just so happened that I was making a mala, and I was about to send it off, and I've been trying to take some of my lavender that I grow in my garden and put some in the package, and it's just this whole process. But as I went outside, I went to the lavender plant, and it struck me that all of that I was so worried and stressed and fearful about, it really didn't matter. And that the sun was shining, and there's plants growing, and it's this thing called lavender. It's so beautiful and so pure, and I could just drop it instantly. And I think of nature as the great healer. So we all have different ways and mediums to come into that place of emotional resilience. And if you've lived this long, you've undoubtedly experienced emotional resilience. So just keep continuously adding to your own toolbox of what helps you, what supports you, to get back into that pure heart and mind.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So
thank you
keep
all.
on being resilient, everybody, and find the pathway that works for you. And if you enjoyed our chat today, please press like and follow and all those sorts of things, that you subscribe, whatever the words are that happen to be there. And we will see you hopefully next week at our next little chat together. Thanks, guys.